The forbidden desire of a powerful CEO, a secret passion he can never reveal to the world. Hello, let's start another beautiful story. Welcome to my channel. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Let's go. The setting. Sun painted the San Francisco skyline in hues of amber and gold, a fitting backdrop for the empire Max Carter had built from nothing but raw ambition and relentless drive. From his corner office on the 52nd floor of the Carter Technologies headquarters, he watched the city transform into a glittering constellation of lights, each one representing a potential user of his company's products. At 42, Maxwell Carter was the embodiment of modern success. His salt and pepper hair and steel-gray eyes gave him an air of authority that commanded respect in any room. The Wall Street Journal had once described him as devastatingly charismatic, a description that made him smirk every time he remembered it. Charisma was just another tool in his arsenal, like the custom-made suits he wore, or the precisely calculated smile he had perfected over years of board meetings. Tonight, however, his mind wasn't on his public image. The manila folder on his desk demanded his attention. Preliminary paperwork for what would become the largest tech merger in history. Quantum Dynamics, their biggest competitor, was finally within reach. The merger would create a technological powerhouse unprecedented in scale and influence. "Mr. Carter?" His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "The ethics consultation team has arrived." Max straightened his tie, a habit born from years of preparing for battle in corporate boardrooms. "Send them in, Rebecca." The glass doors swept open, revealing a trio of consultants from Reynolds and Associates, the prestigious firm hired to ensure the merger's ethical compliance. Two senior partners entered first, but it was the third person who caught Max's attention and, for a fraction of a second, made him forget about the merger entirely. Claire Reynolds moved with quiet confidence, her presence somehow both commanding and understated. Her dark hair was pulled back in a sleek chignon, emphasizing the sharp intelligence in her green eyes. At 28, she was remarkably young for her position, but her reputation preceded her. She had single-handedly exposed 3 major corporate ethics violations in the past year alone, earning both admiration and fear in Silicon Valley's inner circles. "Mr. Carter," the senior partner began, "thank you for meeting with us. I believe you're familiar with our team's reputation, but allow me to introduce—" "Claire Reynolds," Max finished, extending his hand. Their eyes met, and something electric passed between them, a current of recognition that neither had expected. Her handshake was firm, professional, but her fingers lingered against his palm for a heartbeat too long. "Your work on the Brunswick case was impressive." A slight smile played at the corners of her mouth. "That's an interesting choice of words, Mr. Carter, considering it cost Brunswick Technologies their merger." The challenge in her voice was unmistakable. Max felt a smile tugging at his own lips, recognizing a worthy opponent. "Sometimes, Ms. Reynolds, prevention is better than cure. I trust you'll find our ethical standards considerably higher than Brunswick's. We'll see." Her response was cool, professional, but there was something in her eyes that spoke of hidden depths, of thoughts and feelings carefully controlled. The meeting proceeded with discussions of timelines and procedures, but Max found his attention repeatedly drawn to Claire. She spoke with precision and insight, asking questions that proved she had done her homework on Carter Technologies. Her analysis was razor-sharp, cutting through corporate jargon to expose the real issues at stake. As the sun disappeared completely and the city lights took over, Max realized he had memorized the way she tucked loose strands of hair behind her ear when deep in thought, the slight furrow of her brow when she disagreed with something, the passionate intensity in her voice when discussing ethical implications. We'll need full access to your internal communications regarding the merger, Claire was saying, her pen poised over her notepad. All meetings, emails, and decisions must be documented and transparent. Of course, Max agreed, perhaps too quickly. Whatever you need. Their eyes met again, and this time the connection lasted longer than either intended. In that moment, Max Carter, the man who had built an empire through careful calculation and control, felt something shift inside him, like tectonic plates moving beneath the surface of his carefully constructed world. The senior partner's voice broke the spell. Well, I believe that covers our initial requirements. We'll have our team set up in your offices starting tomorrow. As they gathered their materials to leave, Claire dropped her pen. Both she and Max reached for it simultaneously, their fingers brushing. The contact was brief but electric, sending a jolt through both of them. Max straightened up first, offering her the pen with a steady hand that belied his inner turmoil. "Thank you, Mr. Carter," she said softly, accepting it. "Max," he corrected, surprising himself. "Please, call me Max." She studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. "Good night, Max." After they left, he stood at his window again, watching the city pulse with life far below. The merger documents still waited on his desk, but his thoughts were elsewhere, replaying every moment of the meeting, every glance, every word. In the reflection of the glass, he saw not just the powerful CEO the world knew, but something else, a man standing on the precipice of something both thrilling and dangerous. The rational part of his mind warned him to step back, to remember everything he had built, everything at stake. But another part, a part he thought he had buried under years of ambition and control, whispered of possibilities. His phone buzzed. With a message from Rebecca, Quantum Dynamics Board wants to move up tomorrow's meeting. Max picked up his phone, his empire calling him back to reality. But as he typed his response, he couldn't shake the feeling that his carefully ordered world had just begun to unravel, all because of a pair of green eyes and a challenging smile. He had built his life on calculated risks, on knowing exactly when to strike and when to wait. But for the first time in years, Maxwell Carter felt something he couldn't calculate, couldn't control, couldn't predict, and that terrified him almost as much as it thrilled him. Claire Reynolds stood in her temporary office at Carter Technologies, staring at the sprawling city through floor-to-ceiling windows that seemed designed to make occupants feel like gods among mortals. The morning fog was rolling in from the bay, wrapping the skyscrapers in a mystical shroud that matched her conflicted state of mind. "You're here early," a familiar voice observed. She turned to find Max Carter leaning against her doorframe, 2 coffee cups in hand. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent, but it was the intensity in his eyes that caught her attention. "I could say the same about you," she replied, accepting the coffee he offered. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, sending an unwelcome spark through her system. Most CEOs don't make personal coffee deliveries. Most CEOs don't have their entire empire under ethical review. His smile was disarming, genuine in a way that made her professional armor crack slightly. "Besides, I wanted to see how you're settling in." Claire took a sip to hide her reaction. The coffee was exactly how she liked it, oat milk latte with an extra shot. She raised an eyebrow. "You asked Rebecca how I take my coffee." "I notice things," he said simply, moving to stand beside her at the window. "It's how I built this company. The details matter." The proximity was dangerous. She could smell his cologne, subtle and expensive, mixing with the coffee aroma. "Speaking of details, I need to interview your board members individually, starting with Jonathan Pierce." Something flickered across Max's face. Concern, perhaps. "Jonathan can be difficult. I should warn you that he's been trying to undermine your leadership for the past year," Claire finished. "That he opposed the merger from the start. Don't worry, Mr. Carter. I've done my homework." Back to Mr. Carter, are we? His voice carried a hint of amusement, but his eyes were serious. I thought we agreed on Max. That was after hours, she countered. This is business. And what exactly do you consider this moment? He gestured to their coffee cups, their shared view of the fog-wrapped city. Business or pleasure? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications. Claire felt her heart rate quicken, but kept her voice steady. I consider this a mistake. She set down her coffee and moved to her desk, creating physical distance. I appreciate the welcome, but we both know this can't happen. Whatever this is. Max didn't move from the window, but she felt his gaze following her. What exactly do you think this is, Claire? A complication, she said firmly, pulling out her laptop. One that could compromise both the merger and my firm's reputation, not to mention my personal integrity. He finally turned to face her fully, his expression unreadable. Is that what you really believe, or is that what you're telling yourself because it's safer? Before she could respond, a knock at the door interrupted them. Jonathan Pierce stood there, his expensive suit and perfectly coiffed hair failing to hide the predatory gleam in his eyes. Am I interrupting something? Not at all, Max replied smoothly. But Claire noticed his jaw tighten. Ms. Reynolds was just briefing me on today's schedule. She's all yours, Jonathan. As Max left, Jonathan's eyes lingered on the 2 coffee cups, his expression calculating. Claire felt a chill run down her spine, not from fear, but from the recognition that she had just given ammunition to a man who was clearly looking for ways to hurt his boss. Shall we begin? She asked professionally, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. Jonathan's smile didn't reach his eyes. Of course. I have quite a few concerns about this merger that I'd love to share. The interview that followed was a masterclass in corporate politics. Jonathan was careful, never directly attacking Max, but painting a picture of a CEO who had become increasingly distracted, making decisions that seemed more personal than professional. He's different lately, Jonathan observed with false concern. Distracted, taking meetings without the board's knowledge. One might wonder if he's fully committed to transparency. Claire kept her face neutral, but her mind was racing. Was he fishing for information about her early morning meeting with Max? Mr. Pierce, let's focus on the merger's ethical implications rather than office politics. But isn't the CEO's judgment relevant to your investigation? Jonathan leaned forward. After all, if his decision-making is compromised by personal factors, wouldn't that concern you? The threat was veiled but clear. Claire felt her professional reputation balancing on a knife's edge. One wrong move, one misinterpreted coffee delivery, and everything she'd worked for could unravel. After Jonathan left, Claire sat at her desk, her untouched coffee now cold. She pulled up Max's corporate profile on her laptop, telling herself it was for the investigation. His face stared back at her from the screen, confident, powerful, untouchable. But she had seen another side of him this morning, a glimpse of the man behind the empire. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Dinner tonight, to discuss the board interviews. M. Claire stared at the message, her finger hovering over the reply button. Every professional instinct told her to decline, to maintain boundaries, to protect herself. But another part of her, a part she usually kept locked away behind spreadsheets and ethical guidelines, wanted to say yes. She thought of Jonathan's calculating eyes, of the way he had noticed those coffee cups. She thought of her firm's reputation, of her own career goals. Then she thought of Max's question. Was she making choices based on conviction or fear? The fog outside her window had begun to lift, revealing the city in sharp clarity. But Claire's path forward felt more uncertain than ever. With steady fingers that belied her inner turmoil, she typed her reply, 7 p.m., but somewhere discreet. And this is strictly business. The response came immediately. Of course, strictly business. They both knew it was a lie. The Laurel Heights neighborhood of San Francisco felt worlds away from the gleaming corporate towers downtown. Hidden behind an unmarked door, the private dining room at Maison Laurent offered the kind of discretion that came with a hefty price tag and unspoken understanding. Claire sat alone at a corner table, watching condensation bead on her untouched water glass. She had chosen a black dress that walked the line between professional and elegant, appropriate for a business dinner, yet undeniably feminine. Now, waiting for Max, she questioned every decision that had led to this moment. The traffic was terrible. "I'm sorry I'm late." She looked up to find Max standing there, his tie loosened just enough to suggest he'd had a trying day. He'd changed. Suits since morning, she noticed, into a midnight blue that made his grey eyes more striking. "I was beginning to think you'd changed your mind," she said, aiming for lightness but hearing the tension in her own voice. "About you." He sat down, his knee brushing hers under the small table. Neither moved away. "Never." The sommelier appeared, and Max ordered without consulting the wine list. Claire watched his hands as he spoke, strong and certain, yet capable of surprising gentleness, as she'd noticed during their morning coffee exchange. "So," she said when they were alone again, "shall we discuss the board interviews?" "We should." Max studied her face. "Starting with Jonathan's obvious attempt to weaponize our coffee meeting. You noticed that too?" "I've known Jonathan for 15 years. He's like a shark, always testing the water for blood." Max's expression darkened. "What exactly did he say?" Claire recounted the interview, watching Max's jaw tighten at Jonathan's implications about his judgment. "He's building a narrative," she concluded. "One where you're compromised, distracted by you," Max finished. Their eyes met across the table. The arrival of their appetizers provided a momentary reprieve from the intensity. Claire focused on her plate, a delicate arrangement of seared scallops. "This can't happen, Max." "What can't happen?" "This. Us. The lingering looks, the morning, coffee, the private dinners." She gestured at their intimate surroundings. "We're playing with fire." "Maybe fire is exactly what we need." His voice was low, intimate. "When was the last time you did something simply because you wanted to?" "Claire? Not because it was proper or professional or prudent?" The question hit too close to home. Claire had built her career on being the voice of reason, the ethical compass. But sitting here, watching the candlelight play across Max's features, reason felt increasingly irrelevant. "I had a life before this job, you know," she said, surprising herself with the admission. "I wasn't always the stern ethics consultant." "Tell me." His interest seemed genuine, hungry for any glimpse behind her professional facade. "I used to paint. Landscapes mostly. I'd spend whole weekends in Big Sur or Mendocino, just me and my easel." She smiled at the memory. "My apartment still smells like turpentine sometimes." "Why did you stop?" "Life happened. Career happened." She took a sip of the wine he'd ordered. A Burgundy that probably cost more than those old painting supplies. "Sometimes we have to choose between what we want and what we need to do. And this?" Max's hand moved across the table, his fingers brushing hers. "Which category does this fall into?" Before she could answer, her phone buzzed. Then his. Both screens lit up with the same urgent message from Rebecca. "Emergency board meeting called for tomorrow morning. JP requesting full ethics review findings." Claire pulled her hand back as if burned. "He's making his move. He's trying to force our hand." Max's voice was steel. "He knows the ethics review isn't complete. If he can make it look like we're hiding something, the merger could fall apart." Claire felt the weight of professional responsibility settle back onto her shoulders. "I should go. I need to prepare my preliminary findings." They stood simultaneously, too close in the intimate space. Claire could feel the heat radiating from his body, could smell that subtle cologne that had haunted her thoughts all day. Let me drive you home, Max offered. No, she stepped back, creating distance. That would be inappropriate. His smile was sad. We passed that line several cups of coffee ago. Outside, the fog had returned, thick and disorienting. Claire's Uber was waiting, but Max caught her arm before she could leave. Claire! She turned, knowing she shouldn't. Whatever Jonathan's planning, he said, whatever happens tomorrow, know that this isn't just some game to me. You aren't just some distraction. The intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. That's what I'm afraid of, she whispered. In the back of the Uber, Claire leaned her head against the cool window, watching the city lights blur through the fog. Her phone buzzed again, another message from an unknown number, but not Max this time. Interesting choice of restaurant for a business meeting. The board will be very interested in your definition of ethical conduct. J. Claire closed her eyes, her heart pounding. She had spent her career analyzing risks, protecting others from their worst decisions. Now, she realized, she had become exactly the kind of liability she would have warned against. The question was, could she walk away before everything fell apart? And more importantly, did she want to? The Carter Technologies boardroom felt like a gladiatorial arena at dawn. Early morning light streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the polished mahogany table where 12 board members sat in anticipation. Claire stood at the front of the room, her presentation materials ready, trying not to notice how Max's chair remained conspicuously empty. Shall we begin? Jonathan Pierce's voice cut through the murmurs. Or should we wait for our CEO to grace us with his presence? As if on cue, the double doors swung open. Max strode in, impeccable in a light grey suit that Claire hadn't seen before. Their eyes met briefly, and she saw the subtle shadows beneath his, evidence of a sleepless night that matched her own. My apologies for the delay, Max said smoothly, taking his seat at the head of the table. I was on a call with Quantum Dynamics leadership. They're understandably concerned about this hasty meeting. Jonathan leaned forward, his smile predatory. They should be concerned. Ms. Reynolds, please share your preliminary findings with the board. Claire straightened, switching into professional mode despite her racing heart. I should note that this review is far from complete. Standard protocol requires at least 2 more weeks of— We're not interested in standard protocol, Jonathan interrupted. We're interested in what you've discovered so far about the ethical implications of this merger and about the conduct of certain parties involved. The emphasis he placed on conduct made Claire's stomach turn. She glanced at her laptop. Screen buying time. Our initial review shows that the merger's technical framework is sound. There are some concerns about market concentration that need to be addressed, but nothing that can't be mitigated with proper— What about personal conduct? Jonathan's voice was honey smooth. Specifically, the conduct of those overseeing this merger. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Claire felt every eye on her, but none more intensely than Max's. I'm not sure what you're referring to, Mr. Pierce. Jonathan pulled out his phone. Perhaps these photos will refresh your memory. The boardroom screen flickered to life, displaying high-resolution images. Max and Claire sharing coffee in her office, their hands touching over the cup. Max leaning close to her at the window. And most damaging, them entering Maison Laurent together the previous night. These were taken by our security team, Jonathan announced, his voice dripping with false concern. Standard procedure monitoring all visitors to our offices. But what caught my attention wasn't the early morning meetings or the lingering touches. It was the dinner at one of San Francisco's most romantic restaurants. Claire felt her professional facade cracking. She opened her mouth to speak, but Max's voice cut through the tension. Is there a point to this theatrical display, Jonathan? His tone was deadly calm. Or are you simply trying to distract from the real issue? Your consistent attempts to sabotage this merger. Jonathan's smile widened. The real issue, Max, is the integrity of this process. How can we trust an ethics review when the reviewer is clearly compromised? How can we trust a CEO who's making decisions based on personal interests? That's enough. Claire found her voice, steel entering her tone. My personal life is not relevant to this review. The findings are based on hard data, financial projections, and market analysis, all of which support the merger's viability. Your personal life became relevant the moment you began an inappropriate relationship with the subject of your investigation, Jonathan countered. He turned to the board members. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a duty to our shareholders. This merger represents billions in potential value. Can we risk it all on the judgment of a CEO who's clearly lost his objectivity? The boardroom erupted in murmurs. Claire watched the faces around the table, some concerned, others calculating, a few almost gleeful at the drama unfolding before them. Max stood slowly, commanding attention without raising his voice. If we're discussing objectivity, Jonathan, perhaps we should examine your own. Should I share the emails proving you've been in secret talks with Quantum's competitors? Or your attempts to undermine this merger from the start? Jonathan's smile faltered for the first time. That's absurd. Is it? Max's hand moved to his suit jacket. I have copies right here. Would the board be interested in seeing them? The atmosphere in the room shifted. Now it was Jonathan who looked uncomfortable, his earlier confidence cracking. But before either man could speak again, Claire stepped forward. I am recusing myself from this review. All eyes turned to her. She kept her spine straight, her voice steady. To ensure complete objectivity, I will recommend another partner from my firm take over, someone whose integrity cannot be questioned. Claire, Max started, but she cut him off with a look. It's the right thing to do, she said firmly, for the merger, for the company, and for my firm's reputation. The silence that followed was deafening. Claire began gathering her materials, her hands steady despite the turmoil inside. She had spent her career making tough, ethical calls. This was no different, but as she walked toward the door, Max's voice stopped her. The board should know something else. She turned, her heart in her throat. I'm calling for a vote of no confidence, Max announced. In our vice president, Jonathan Pierce, the evidence of his sabotage attempts is clear, and I move that he be removed from his position immediately. The boardroom exploded into chaos. Claire slipped out during the commotion, but not before catching one last glimpse of Max. He stood tall, unflinching in the face of the storm he had just unleashed, every inch the emperor defending his kingdom. In the elevator, Claire's phone buzzed with a text from him. We need to talk, please. She stared at the message until the screen went dark, reflecting her own troubled expression. She had done the right thing professionally, but why did it feel like she had just made the biggest mistake of her life? Rain lashed against the windows of Claire's apartment in Pacific Heights, matching her turbulent mood. She sat cross-legged on her living room floor, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, remnants of a move she'd never fully completed, too busy building her career to properly settle into a home. Her easel stood in the corner, dust-covered and untouched, a silent reminder of the life she'd put on hold. The tech news sites were already buzzing with speculation. Carter Technologies board meeting ends in chaos. Ethical concerns plague. Tech merger. Power struggle at Silicon Valley giant. None mentioned her by name yet, but it was only a matter of time. Her phone had been buzzing steadily for hours. Calls from her firm's partners, emails from journalists, messages from colleagues. But it was the ones from Max that made her hands shake. 7 missed calls, 3 voicemails, 5 texts. She hadn't opened any of them. A knock at her door made her freeze. She knew who it was before she even checked the peephole. Max stood in her hallway, rain-soaked and slightly disheveled, his usual corporate polish softened by the weather and the late hour. He'd loosened his tie, and his hair was damp from the storm. "How did you find my address?" she asked, not opening the door fully. "I'm a tech CEO. Finding information is what I do." His attempt at humor fell flat. "Can I come in? Please?" Every logical part of her screamed no, but she found herself stepping aside. He entered her space carefully, taking in the half-unpacked boxes, the lonely easel, the view of the rain-swept city through her windows. "You're living like someone who's ready to run," he observed quietly. "Maybe I am." She crossed her arms, maintaining distance. The board meeting was a calculated move by Jonathan that backfired spectacularly. Max turned to face her. The vote passed. He's been removed from his position, effective immediately. And the merger? Proceeding with a new ethics team, as you recommended. His eyes searched her face. "You didn't have to recuse yourself." "Yes, I did." Claire moved to her kitchen, needing occupation. She pulled out 2 wine glasses, then stopped herself. "This is exactly what got us into trouble in the first place. Is that what this is to you? Trouble?" He moved closer, his presence filling her small kitchen. "Because I've been sitting in meetings all day, dealing with board members and lawyers and PR teams, and all I could think about was you. Max, I've spent 15 years building this company," he continued, his voice intense. "Every decision calculated, every move planned. I thought I knew exactly who I was and what I wanted. Then you walked into my office and suddenly none of it made sense anymore." Claire gripped the kitchen counter, needing the stability. "We barely know each other. I know that you drink oat milk lattes with an extra shot. I know you used to paint landscapes in Big Sur. I know you keep your shoes perfectly aligned under your desk, but your desk itself is organized chaos." He stepped closer. "I know that when you're thinking hard, you get this tiny crease between your eyebrows. Like right now." She touched her forehead self-consciously, and he caught her hand, holding it between them. "I know that this, whatever this is between us, terrifies you as much as it terrifies me," he said softly. "But I also know I'm tired of pretending it isn't real." The rain drummed against her windows, creating a cocoon of sound around them. Claire could feel her pulse in her throat, could smell his cologne mixed with rain, and something uniquely him. "I could lose everything," she whispered. "My reputation, my career." "I'm not asking you to risk anything." His thumb traced patterns on her palm. "I'm just asking you to be honest. With yourself, if not with me." Claire pulled her hand away, moving to the living room window. The city lights blurred through the rain-streaked glass. "You want honesty? Fine. Yes, I feel something for you. Something that makes me question everything I thought I knew about myself. And it terrifies me because I've spent my entire career being the person who makes the right choice, the ethical choice, the responsible choice. And what if the responsible choice isn't always the right one?" He followed her to the window, but didn't touch her. "What if sometimes the right choice is the one that scares us the most?" She turned to face him, her back against the cool glass. "The board meeting today, that was just the beginning. Jonathan may be gone, but the scandal isn't. The media will dig, they'll find out about us, everything I've worked for. Let me protect you." "I don't need protection," she said sharply. I need to think clearly, which I can't do. When you're standing this close." Max stepped back slightly, respect in the gesture. "Then think about this. I've spent my life building an empire, but standing here in your half-unpacked apartment, looking at your dusty easel and your view of the city, this feels more real than any board meeting or merger deal ever has." The raw honesty in his voice made her chest ache. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the powerful CEO or the billionaire, but just a man standing in her apartment, as uncertain and overwhelmed as she was. "I should hate you," she said softly. "You've complicated everything." "Hate is easier," he agreed. "Safer. Is that what you want? Safe?" Before she could answer, both their phones buzzed simultaneously. Claire reached for hers first, her face paling as she read the screen. "What is it?" Max asked, though his own phone showed the same notification. "TechCrunch," she whispered. "They're running a story tomorrow. Ethics consultant and tech CEO. Inside the scandal-threatening Silicon Valley's biggest merger." Max's expression hardened. "Jonathan. It doesn't matter who leaked it." Claire's voice shook. "It's happening. Everything I feared." He crossed the distance between them in 2 strides, his hands framing her face. "Look at me. Whatever comes next, we face it together. No more hiding, no more pretending this isn't what it is." "And what is it?" she challenged, even as she leaned into his touch. Instead of answering, he kissed her. It was nothing like the polished, controlled CEO she'd first met. This was raw, desperate, real. Claire felt something inside her break. And reform, like a wave crashing against rocks, leaving everything changed in its wake. When they finally parted, both breathless, the rain had stopped. The city glittered beyond her windows, full of possibility and danger in equal measure. "That's what it is," Max said softly. "The question is, are you brave enough to face it?" Claire looked up at him, seeing her future splitting into 2 distinct paths. The safe route, the one she'd always taken, stretched out, clear and predictable, before her. But the other path, the one that led into unknown territory with this man who had upended her carefully ordered world, that was the path that terrified her. And for the first time in her life, she wondered if terror might be exactly what she needed. The headlines hit at dawn, spreading through Silicon Valley like wildfire. Claire watched them cascade across her. Phone screen while sitting in Max's kitchen, wrapped in one of his dress shirts. Her own clothes from yesterday carefully folded on a nearby chair. Silicon Valley's new power couple, love, ethics, and billion-dollar deals. She read aloud, her voice bitter. They make it sound like a romantic comedy. Max placed a cup of coffee in front of her. Oat milk latte, perfectly made. His penthouse offered a panoramic view of the bay, the morning sun painting everything in deceptively peaceful golden light. "You haven't seen the worst of them yet." "Oh?" She scrolled further. "The ethics of desire. How a corporate romance could derail tech's biggest merger. Better." She looked up to find him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "What?" "You're beautiful when you're angry," he said simply. "I'm not angry. I'm—" She searched for the right word, terrified. "My firm called an emergency partners meeting for 9 a.m. They're probably voting on whether to fire me as we speak." Max's phone buzzed. It hadn't stopped all morning. "Quantum Dynamics' CEO wants to meet. Their board is nervous about the publicity. They should be." Claire stood, needing to move. The shirt she wore hit mid-thigh, and she was acutely aware of Max's eyes following her. "This is exactly what Jonathan wanted. The merger could fall apart because of us." "Because of him," Max corrected. "He leaked those photos, planted the story." "Does it matter?" She turned to face him. "The damage is done. My career is probably over. Years of building my reputation all gone because I couldn't—" She stopped, herself. "Couldn't what?" Max moved closer. "Couldn't resist this." His hand cupped her cheek, thumb tracing her lower lip. "Because I couldn't either, and I don't regret it." Before she could respond, the elevator doors opened, and Rebecca rushed in, tablet in hand. She barely blinked at Claire's state of undress. "We have a situation." "When don't we?" Max didn't move away from Claire. The board is calling another emergency meeting. Quantum stock is down 12% on the news, and their CEO is threatening to pull out of the merger. Rebecca's fingers flew across her tablet. And Jonathan Pierce is giving an interview to CNBC in an hour. Claire felt the blood drain from her face. He's going to paint himself as the whistleblower who exposed corporate corruption. Already is. Rebecca held up her tablet, showing Jonathan's tweet. Ethics matter, truth matters. Watch my exclusive interview about the real story behind Silicon Valley's biggest scandal. Max's expression darkened. Schedule a press conference before his interview. Max, no, Claire started. Yes, his voice was steel. I'm done letting him control the narrative. We have nothing to be ashamed of. We have everything to lose, she countered. I already lost everything that mattered once before. The pain in his voice made her pause. My wife, Alexandra, she died 6 years ago. Cancer. I buried myself in work, built this empire, convinced myself it was enough. He touched Claire's face again. It wasn't. You showed me that. Rebecca cleared her throat. The press is gathering downstairs. Security counted at least 30 reporters. Claire moved to the window. Sure enough, news vans lined the street below. I should go, change into yesterday's clothes, do the walk of shame past the cameras. No, Max's voice was firm. We face this, together, on our terms. And what terms are those? He smiled, that devastating smile that had first caught her attention. Rebecca, call my tailor. Have him bring over a selection of women's business wear, something in Claire's size. Already did, Rebecca replied, deadpan. He's on his way up, along with hair and makeup. Claire blinked. You're serious about this? Deadly. Max pulled her close. No more hiding. No more pretending this isn't exactly what it is. Two adults who found something real in the midst of all this corporate chess. The merger will succeed or fail, based on its merits, not on who I'm dating. He kissed her forehead. Let me handle Quantum. You focus on your firm. They're going to fire me. Then we'll start our own consulting firm. Or you can go back to painting. Or we'll travel the world while my board figures out this mess. His eyes sparkled. I'm rather good at building things from scratch. Despite everything, Claire felt a laugh bubble up. You're insane. Probably. He grinned. But I'm also right. We can weather this storm. The elevator dinged again, announcing the arrival of Max's tailor and his team. Claire looked at her reflection in the window, wearing his shirt, her hair mussed, looking nothing like the polished professional she'd spent years becoming. But she also saw something else in that reflection, a woman who, for the first time in years, felt fully alive. Okay, she said softly. Let's do this, but we do it smart. Max raised an eyebrow. We get ahead of Jonathan's interview, yes, but not with a press conference. Her mind raced. We need something more personal, an exclusive sit-down with someone respected. Maria Chen at Bloomberg. Why her? Because she's known for being tough but fair. If she believes us, others will too. Claire straightened her spine. We tell our story before Jonathan can twist it. The truth about how we met, about his attempts at sabotage, about the real ethical implications of the merger. Max's smile widened. This is why I fell for you, that brilliant mind. Just my mind, she teased, surprising herself with the lightness she felt despite everything. His kiss was answer enough, broken only by Rebecca's pointed cough. Maria Chen is waiting. For your call, she announced. And the tailor would like to know if Ms. Reynolds prefers Chanel or Dior for her first public appearance as Silicon Valley's most talked-about woman. Claire took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. Through the window she could see more news vans arriving. Her phone buzzed with another call from her firm. Max's board was waiting. Quantum's CEO was probably pacing somewhere, watching his stock price fall. But here, in this moment, with Max's hand steady on her lower back and a plan forming in her mind, she felt strangely, unexpectedly peaceful. The storm was here, but maybe, just maybe, they were strong enough to dance in the rain. Tell me about the moment you knew this was more than just business. Maria Chen's question hung in the air of her Bloomberg studio. Under the harsh lights, Claire sat beside Max on a sleek white couch, her hand barely touching his. She wore a cream-colored Chanel suit that made her look both powerful and feminine, a deliberate choice for this moment that would define their narrative. "It wasn't one moment," Claire answered, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "It was a series of small revelations. The way he remembered how I took my coffee, the quiet conversations about art and life, the realization that behind the CEO everyone saw was a man who genuinely cared about doing the right thing." Maria leaned forward, her reputation for incisive questioning evident in her next words. "And the ethical implications didn't concern you, as the person responsible for reviewing the merger?" "Of course they did," Claire said. "That's why I recused myself immediately when I realized my feelings might affect my objectivity. The integrity of the review was always paramount." "Max?" Maria turned to him. "Your company's stock has dropped 15% since this story broke. Quantum Dynamics is threatening to walk away from the merger. Was she worth it?" Max's hand found Claire's, interlacing their fingers. "The merger will succeed or fail based on its business merit. But to answer your question, yes, some things are worth more than stock prices." "Like what?" "Like finding someone who sees past the empire to the person behind it." His voice carried a vulnerability that made Claire's chest tighten. "Like realizing that success isn't just about quarterly reports and market share." Maria's expression softened slightly, but her questions remained sharp. "Let's talk about Jonathan Pierce. He claims he exposed your relationship because of genuine ethical concerns about the merger. Your response?" "Jonathan Pierce," Max said carefully, "had been attempting to sabotage this merger long before Claire entered the picture. We have documentation of his secret meetings with our competitors, emails proving his attempts to undermine the deal. He didn't expose anything. He created a scandal to serve his own agenda." The interview continued, each question a potential landmine, each answer carefully balanced between honesty and discretion. Through it all, Claire felt Max's hand in hers, steady and warm. But as they left the studio an hour later, their phones exploded with notifications. Jonathan's counter-move had begun. "He's released emails," Rebecca reported, rushing to meet them. "Private correspondence between board members expressing concerns about the merger months ago. And—" She hesitated. "What else?" Max demanded. "Photos of you from 3 years ago with other women. He's painting a pattern of inappropriate relationships with employees and consultants." Claire felt Max stiffen beside her. "Those photos are taken out of context. Business dinners, charity events. Context doesn't matter in the court of public opinion," Claire said quietly. "He's trying to make you look predatory, make me look like just another conquest." They rushed through the lobby toward their waiting car, reporters shouting questions. "Mr. Carter, did you pursue other employees? Ms. Reynolds, were you aware of his history? Is this a pattern of behavior?" Inside the car, Max pulled out his phone. "I'm calling an emergency board meeting. We need to—" "No." Claire's voice was firm. "That's exactly what Jonathan wants. More meetings, more defensive moves, more chaos." She turned to face him. "Tell me the truth. Those other women were nothing." His eyes met hers, fierce with conviction. "Business associates, nothing more. I haven't, not since Alexandra died, until you." She studied his face, years of experience reading people coming into play. I believe you, but the public won't care about the truth. They want a story, and Jonathan's giving them a juicy one. Max's phone buzzed again. Quantum's CEO. They're calling an emergency shareholder meeting. If they vote to withdraw, then we change the story. Claire's mind raced. The photos, the emails, they're all about the past. So we give them something new, something real. What do you mean? Take me to your wife's grave. Max went still. Claire, the public thinks you're a predator, using power and money to seduce women. Show them the truth. Show them the man who still visits his wife's grave, the man who buried himself in work because he couldn't face losing her, the man who was afraid to feel anything real again until you. His voice was rough with emotion. She squeezed his hand. Let Maria Chen film it. The real story, not the sanitized version we just gave her. Raw, honest, human. It's personal, private. Everything's personal now. Jonathan made sure of that. She touched his face. You told me no more hiding. Did you mean it? Before he could answer, both their phones chimed with breaking news alerts. Claire read hers aloud. Former Carter Technologies employee alleges pattern of harassment. Press conference scheduled for 3 p.m. Max's jaw clenched. Jonathan found someone willing to lie for him. Then we better move fast. Claire turned to Rebecca, who had been quietly managing their crisis from the front seat. Call Maria. Tell her we have a real story for her, but it has to be now. And find out everything you can about this former employee before they go public. Already on it. Rebecca's fingers flew across her tablet. Maria's intrigued. She can meet us in an hour. Max was silent for a long moment, looking out at the city rushing past. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but determined. The cemeteries in Colma. Alexandra loved the old cypress trees there. Claire felt the weight of his trust, the significance of this moment. Are you sure about this? He turned to her, and in his eyes she saw everything. Grief, fear, hope, and something that looked remarkably like love. I'm sure about you. The rest we'll face together. The car turned south toward Colma, racing against time and Jonathan's next move. Claire looked at their joined hands, thinking about choices and consequences, about truth and lies, about the cost of hiding versus the price of being real. They were about to lay bare their souls for the world to judge. But somehow, sitting beside this man who had chosen truth over empire, vulnerability over power, she felt stronger than ever. The storm wasn't over, but maybe, just maybe, the truth would be their shelter. Cypress Lawn, Memorial Park was a world away from Silicon Valley's gleaming towers. Ancient trees stood sentinel over manicured lawns and marble monuments, their shadows dancing in the afternoon light. Maria Chen's camera crew kept a respectful distance as Max led Claire through the winding paths, their footsteps crunching on gravel. I come here every Sunday, Max said quietly, no matter what's happening with the company. Alexandra would have laughed at that, me keeping a regular schedule for anything. Claire squeezed his hand, but stayed silent, sensing he needed to talk. She was the spontaneous one, always dragging me to art galleries, jazz clubs, hidden restaurants in Chinatown. Said I worked too hard, lived too safely. A sad smile crossed his face. She would have liked you. They stopped before a simple but elegant black granite headstone. Alexandra Carter, beloved wife, fearless spirit, 1982-2019. Below the dates was a quote. Life is not measured by the breaths we take, but by the moments that take our breath away. Max knelt, brushing away imaginary dust from the stone. I had her favorite quote engraved. She lived by it, always chasing moments, experiences, feelings. I was the opposite, always planning, calculating, controlling. Maria's camera captured it all. The tender way he touched the stone, the grief still evident in his posture, the gentle way Claire stood beside him, offering silent support. "The last thing she said to me," Max continued, his voice rough, "was, 'Promise me you won't hide behind those walls you built.' I thought I knew what she meant. Threw myself into work, built the company bigger than ever, told myself that was living, that she'd be proud." He stood, turning to face Claire. The cameras caught his profile, the mix of pain and hope in his expression. "But I was just hiding, in plain sight, until you walked into my office and saw right through every defense I'd constructed." Claire felt tears threatening. "Max!" "Ms. Reynolds," Maria's voice was gentle but professional, "what are you feeling right now?" Claire took a shaky breath. "I'm feeling honored and terrified. Honored that he trusts me enough to share this part of himself. Terrified because I understand now, standing here, exactly what's at stake. This isn't just about a merger or a scandal. It's about two people who weren't looking for love but found it anyway. And the allegations," Maria pressed, "the claims about other women, are about as real as the ethics concerns Jonathan claimed to have," a new voice announced. They turned to find Rebecca approaching, tablet in hand. "The former employee planning to make allegations." She just withdrew her statement. Apparently someone reminded her that lying under oath is a federal crime. "What do you mean?" Maria's journalistic instincts were clearly piqued. Rebecca's smile was sharp. "We found emails between her and Jonathan Pierce offering compensation for her story. The FBI is very interested in them." The news should have felt like victory, but Claire noticed Max had turned back to Alexandra's, grave, his expression distant. She moved to his side, media and cameras forgotten. "What are you thinking?" she asked softly. "That Alexandra would be laughing right now. At all of it, the scandal, the schemes, the way I finally learned to let someone in because of an ethics consultation, of all things." He touched the headstone one last time. "She always said the universe had a sense of humor." Claire looked at the quote again, understanding flooding her. "That's why you fought so hard for the merger, why you wanted it to be ethical, clean. You were trying to build something meaningful, not just profitable. I was trying to honor her memory by creating something that mattered." He faced her fully. "But somewhere along the way, I forgot the most important part of what she taught me, that real meaning isn't in quarterly reports or market share. It's in moments like this, in being brave enough to be real." Maria's voice cut in gently. "Mr. Carter, the Quantum Dynamics Board is meeting as we speak. Their decision could come any minute. Do you have anything to say to them?" Max looked at Claire, then back at Alexandra's grave, then finally at the camera. "Yes, the merger matters, the company matters, but what matters more is being true to yourself and to the people you love. Alexandra taught me that. Claire reminded me. So, whatever Quantum decides, whatever the market does, I know I made the right choice." As if on cue, Rebecca's tablet chimed. Her eyes widened as she read the notification. "What is it?" Claire asked, though something in her heart already knew. "Quantum's board vote is in." Rebecca looked up. "They're not only staying in the merger, they're fast-tracking it. Their CEO says, and I quote, 'Any leader who can show this level of genuine humanity and integrity is someone we want to partner with.'" The news should have felt like triumph, but standing there, in that sacred space between past and present, it felt more like validation, proof that being real, being vulnerable, being human was its own kind of power. Maria's crew captured the moment Claire turned to Max, tears finally spilling over. "You did it." But Max shook his head, pulling her. "Close. We did it. Alexandra would say we're quite a pair. The ethics consultant who taught the calculating CEO how to feel, and the grieving man who taught the careful professional how to take risks." Claire looked at Alexandra's headstone, at the quote about moments that take your breath away. "Thank you," she whispered, not sure if she was speaking to Alexandra or to the universe that had brought her and Max together. The cypress trees swayed overhead, their shadows dancing across the granite. Somewhere in the distance a bird called out, a sound of life and continuation. And there, in that place of endings and beginnings, Claire understood something profound. Sometimes the greatest love stories aren't just about passion or drama. Sometimes they're about healing, about finding someone who helps you become the person you were always meant to be. Max's phone buzzed. More news about Jonathan's unraveling schemes, no doubt. But for now, they stood together in the lengthening shadows, honoring the past while embracing their future, knowing that whatever came next, they would face it with the strength of two people who had finally learned to be real. Claire stood at the entrance of the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, feeling oddly exposed in her burgundy evening gown. It was their first official public appearance since the cemetery interview went viral, and the media presence was overwhelming. "Ready?" Max asked softly, his hand warm against her lower back. "To attend a charity gala as Silicon Valley's most talked-about couple?" She gave him a wry smile. "Not remotely." The past week had been a whirlwind. Maria Chen's piece had transformed public perception overnight. The raw vulnerability of their cemetery visit, combined with the exposure of Jonathan's schemes, had turned a potential scandal into something else entirely, a modern love story that had captured the public's imagination. But with that transformation came new challenges. "Ms. Reynolds, Mr. Carter," the photographers called out as they made their way up the museum steps. "Look this way. How does it feel to be Silicon Valley's power couple?" Claire felt Max's hand tighten protectively around her waist. She had learned to read his subtle tensions over the past weeks, knew he was fighting the urge to shield her from the cameras, to whisk her away somewhere private. "I'm okay," she whispered, leaning into him slightly. We knew what we were signing up for. Inside, the museum's atrium had been transformed into an elegant reception space. San Francisco's tech elite mingled with artists and philanthropists, all while pretending not to stare at the newest additions to their social circle. "Well, if it isn't the couple of the hour," a familiar voice drawled. They turned to find Regina Walsh, CEO of a major AI firm and one of Max's longtime industry rivals. She air-kissed Claire's cheek with practiced precision. "Darling, you've made quite the splash. The entire valley is buzzing about how you tamed Silicon Valley's most eligible widower." Claire felt Max tense beside her. "I didn't tame anyone," she said coolly, "and Max isn't a wild animal needing domestication. He's a man who chose to be honest about his feelings. Something rare in these circles, wouldn't you say?" Regina's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose slightly. "Feisty. I can see why he likes you." She turned to Max. "The quantum merger's looking good. Strange how things work out, isn't it?" "Not strange at all," Max replied smoothly. "Good ethics make good business. Speaking of which," he gestured across the room where FBI agents were, discreetly entering through a side door. "I believe some of our colleagues are about to learn that lesson the hard way." Regina followed his gaze, her expression sharpening. "Jonathan, the FBI takes corporate espionage very seriously," Max said, "especially when it involves manipulating stock prices through false allegations." As if on cue, a commotion erupted. Near the bar, Jonathan Pierce, who had been holding court with a group of investors, was now being quietly but firmly escorted toward the exit by federal agents. "You knew they were coming," Claire realized, looking at Max. "Rebecca gave me a heads up." His smile was grim. "Apparently Jonathan's schemes went deeper than we thought. He wasn't just trying to sabotage the merger. He was shorting both companies' stock, planning to profit from the chaos he created." "How deliciously dramatic," Regina purred. "Almost," As dramatic as your cemetery interview. Tell me, was that planned too? That was real, Claire said firmly. Something I know might be hard for some people to recognize. Regina's smile turned genuine for the first time. Oh, I like you. You're not just arm candy. You've got teeth. She raised her champagne glass. To real love in fake times, and to karma finally catching up with Jonathan Pierce. As Regina sashayed away, Claire felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. That was a test, Max finished, one you passed with flying colors. Regina's approval carries weight in the valley. I don't need anyone's approval. No, he agreed, pulling her closer. That's one of the things I love about you. The word hung between them, unadorned and honest. They hadn't said it yet, not formally, not in so many words. But here, watching Jonathan being led away in handcuffs while Silicon Valley's elite pretended not to stare, it felt right. Claire turned in his arms, ignoring the photographers who had somehow made it inside. Say that again. Which part? His eyes sparkled. The part about you not needing approval, or the part about loving you? Both, she whispered, but especially the second part. He kissed her then, right there in the middle of the gala, with cameras flashing and tongues wagging. It wasn't their first public kiss, but it felt significant, a declaration, a celebration, a promise. When they parted, Claire noticed something had changed in the room. The stares felt less judgmental, more appreciative, as if seeing them together, so obviously in love, had transformed them from a scandal into something aspirational. Your stock is going to rise tomorrow, she murmured against his chest. I don't care. Liar. She smiled up at him. You care about the company, about building something meaningful. I care about you more. He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Which reminds me, there's something I want to show you, up in the modern wing. They slipped away from the crowd, taking a private elevator to the museum's upper floors. The galleries were closed to the public, but Max seemed to know exactly where he was going. He stopped in front of a large abstract canvas, all bold strokes and vibrant colors. Recognize the artist? Claire's breath caught. It was one of her paintings from her Big Sur period, before she'd given up art for corporate ethics. How did you? I bought it years ago at a small gallery in North Beach. The artist's statement caught my attention, something about finding beauty in ethical choices, about the morality inherent in color and form. He turned to her. I never knew the artist's name. The gallery owner said she wanted to remain anonymous, but when I saw your easel that night in your apartment, when you told me about painting in Big Sur, you figured it out, she whispered. You've been influencing my life long before we met, he said softly, teaching me about ethics and beauty and truth through this painting. And now? Now I want to influence yours. He took her hands in his. Come back to painting, not instead of your career, in addition to it. Start your own consulting firm, paint on weekends, be exactly who you are without apology. The media will talk regardless, so let them talk. About a woman who refuses to be just one thing, who can be both an ethics consultant and an artist, both a professional and a lover, both practical and passionate. Claire looked at her painting, at the bold choices she'd made with color and form, choices she'd been afraid to make in her real life until now. You make me brave, she said softly. No, he countered. You make yourself brave. I just remind you that you can be. Down below, the gala continued. Jonathan was probably being processed at FBI headquarters. Tomorrow, there would be new headlines, new challenges, new choices to make. But here, in front of her past and present colliding on canvas, Claire felt nothing but possibility. She had spent her career analyzing ethical choices, helping others, navigate moral complexity. Now finally, she was living her own truth, messy and complicated and absolutely perfect. "I love you too," she said, the words feeling like coming home. His smile was better than any headline, any stock price, any corporate victory. "I know." The morning sun streamed through the windows of Claire's new studio space in Pacific Heights, illuminating the half-finished canvas before her. She stood back, brush in hand, studying the interplay of light and shadow she'd captured, the San Francisco skyline at dawn, with Carter Technologies building prominent in the foreground. "That's new," Max's voice came from behind her. He wrapped his arms around her waist, careful not to disturb her paint-stained smock. "You usually paint landscapes." "I'm branching out." She leaned back against him, finding beauty in urban spaces, in power and ambition, and she gestured to the silvery towers on her canvas, in the empires men build. "Speaking of empires," he handed her a steaming cup of coffee, oat milk latte, still her preferred brew. "The final merger documents came in this morning. Quantum's board has unanimously approved the terms." Claire set down her brush and turned, in his arms. No last-minute complications, no desperate corporate raiders or scandal-mongering executives. Disappointed. His eyes crinkled with amusement. "Relieved," she corrected, rising on tiptoes to kiss him. "Though I have to admit, corporate intrigue does have its charms. It brought me you, after all." The past month had been a whirlwind of changes. Claire had indeed started her own consulting firm, with an impressive client list that notably did not include Carter Technologies, a deliberate choice to maintain professional boundaries. She'd also returned to painting, converting the top floor of her apartment into a studio that offered panoramic views of the city. Max had changed too. The ruthlessly efficient CEO still commanded his empire, but there was a new softness to him now, a willingness to let the world see his humanity. The tech press had dubbed it his renaissance, though Claire preferred to think of it as him finally becoming fully himself. "Have you seen the latest headlines?" she asked, picking up her tablet from a paint-splattered table. "Tech's power. Couple redefines modern leadership. They're calling us role models for balancing personal and professional life." Max snorted. "If they only knew how many dinner reservations we've cancelled because of work, or how many board meetings you've rescheduled to attend my gallery openings," she countered. The truth was, they were still figuring it out, the delicate dance of maintaining their individual identities while building a life together. It wasn't always perfect, but it was real. "I have something to show you," Max said, taking her hand. "Consider it a merger celebration." He led her to the elevator, down to the street where his driver waited. The car wound through the city, finally stopping at a Victorian mansion in Presidio Heights. The house was stunning, all gabled windows, and intricate woodwork with a view of the bay that took Claire's breath away. "Max, before you say anything," he pulled out a key, "this isn't presumptuous gift-giving from your billionaire boyfriend. This is a practical suggestion from someone who's tired of splitting time between two residences." Claire walked through the grand entrance, taking in the soaring ceilings, the abundance of natural light, "Is that a studio space?" She stopped at the threshold of a room with floor-to-ceiling windows and perfect northern light. The previous owner was an artist too. Max watched her expression carefully. "There's also a home office for late-night merger calls, a gallery wall for your paintings, and," he hesitated, "room to grow, if that's something you might want, eventually." The weight of his words settled over her. They hadn't talked about the future, not in concrete terms. Both of them carried too many scars, too much awareness of life's fragility to rush into promises. "Are you asking me to move in with you?" She turned to face him. "I'm asking you to build a life with me." His voice was soft but certain. Not because of headlines or societal expectations or corporate convenience, but because every morning I wake up thinking about you, and every night I go to sleep grateful that you chose me." Claire looked around the space, not just at its physical beauty, but at what it represented, a merging of their worlds, their passions, their futures. "The art studio is a nice touch," she said, trying to keep her voice light despite the emotion tightening her throat. "I learn from my mistakes." He pulled her close. "Alexandra always said I needed to make room for beauty in my life. With you, I finally understand what she meant." A notification chimed on both their phones. The merger announcement had gone public. Markets would be opening soon. Analysts would be dissecting every detail. The business world would be watching. But here, in this sun-filled room that could be their future, none of that seemed to matter. "Yes," Claire said simply. "Yes to the house. Yes to building a life together." She touched his face. "Yes to making room for beauty and business, for love and ambition, for all of it." His kiss was gentle, full of promise. When they parted, Claire looked out the studio windows at the city spread below them, the same view she'd been painting that morning, but from a different angle. "We should get to the office," she said reluctantly. "The merger announcement can wait 10 minutes. Max's eyes sparkled with mischief. "I believe someone once told me that life isn't measured by stock prices and merger deals, but by moments that take our breath away." Claire thought of Alexandra's gravestone, of the quote that had guided Max's first great love. Now it would guide their love too, this unexpected, complicated, beautiful thing they'd built together. 10 minutes, she agreed, letting him pull her close again. Outside, San Francisco was waking up to news of the biggest tech merger in history. But inside their future home, Claire and Max were simply two people who had found each other against all odds, choosing love over caution, truth over appearance, and the messy beauty of real life over the cold perfection of corporate facades. The merger of their companies was just business. The merger of their lives, that was the real masterpiece. Moving boxes cluttered the Victorian mansion's entryway, each one labelled in Claire's precise handwriting. She stood in the kitchen, surrounded by half-unpacked dishes and the morning's newspapers, all trumpeting the same headline: "Tech's biggest merger complete. Carter Quantum deal reshapes industry." "The stock's up 20%, Max announced, walking in with his tablet. He stopped short at the sight of her expression. "What's wrong?" Claire handed him one of the newspapers, not the business section, but the society pages. The photo showed them at a recent charity gala, but it was the caption that caught his attention. "Silicon Valley's power couple, when will wedding bells ring?" Ah, he set down his tablet. The marriage question. It's not just that. Claire began stress organizing a box of kitchen supplies. "Did you see the latest profile piece? They're calling me the woman who tamed Silicon Valley's most eligible bachelor, as if I'm some sort of trophy." Max gently took a stack of plates from her hands. "You're the founder of the fastest-growing ethics consulting firm in tech. Your paintings are selling for 5 figures. Anyone who sees you as just Max Carter's girlfriend isn't looking very hard. I know that. Logically, I know that." She leaned against the marble counter. "But sometimes I wonder if we moved too fast, moving in together, merging our lives so publicly." "Claire." His voice was soft but firm. "Look at me." She did, seeing not the powerful CEO the world knew, but the man who brought her coffee every morning, who had learned to clean paintbrushes properly, who still visited Alexandra's grave every Sunday, now with Claire by his side. "Do you remember what you told me the day we went public with our relationship?" he asked. "About being real. I remember everything about that day." "So do I, and that's my point." He moved closer, framing her face with his hands. "We've never done anything because the world expected it. Not the merger, Not moving in together, not any of it. We've done it because it felt right for us." Before she could respond, both their phones chimed with urgent notifications. Claire reached hers first, her face paling as she read the screen. "Jonathan," she said quietly. Max's expression hardened. "What about him?" "He's made a plea deal with the FBI. In exchange for a reduced sentence, he's going public with everything he knows about corporate practices in Silicon Valley." She looked up at Max. "Including, apparently, some of Carter Technologies' more aggressive early business tactics." "Before you," Max said immediately. "Before Alexandra even. When I was young and ruthless and thought winning was all that mattered." "I know." Claire touched his arm. "But the media won't care about the timeline. They'll use it to question everything. The merger, our relationship, your transformation from cutthroat CEO to Silicon Valley's reformed bad boy." As if on cue, Max's phone rang. "Rebecca." "The morning shows are already requesting interviews," she reported. "They want both of you. Together." Claire watched emotions play across Max's face. Anger, worry, determination. She remembered their first meeting, how controlled he'd been, how carefully he'd maintained his public image. The man before her now was different, still powerful, still ambitious, but no longer afraid to be vulnerable. "What do you think?" he asked her, surprising them both. The old Max would have made the decision unilaterally, would have handled it with corporate precision. Claire studied him thoughtfully. "I think we stop letting others define our story. No interviews, no defensive statements. Let's show them instead." "Show them what?" She gestured to the chaos of moving boxes around them, to the painting supplies mixed with corporate documents, to the life they were building together. This reality, not the power couple, not the reformed CEO and his artist girlfriend, just us figuring it out like anyone else. "How exactly do we do that?" A smile tugged at her lips. "Remember that charity project you've been considering? The one combining tech education with arts programs for underprivileged kids." "The Alexandra Carter Foundation," he said softly. "Launch it now. Not as a PR move, but as what it really is. A tribute to your first love, a bridge between your world and mine, a way of creating something meaningful together." Max was quiet for a moment, and Claire could almost see him processing the layers of meaning in her suggestion. It wasn't just about countering Jonathan's allegations or controlling the public narrative. It was about honoring the past while building the future, about turning corporate power into genuine positive change. "You're brilliant," he said finally. "You know that? I have my moments." She reached up to straighten his tie, a gesture that had become habit, intimate and domestic. "Though I should warn you, if we do this, the marriage speculation will only increase." "Let it." His smile was tender. "We'll handle that question the same way we've handled everything else, in our own time, in our own way." The morning sun streamed through the Victorian stained glass windows, casting patterns of colour across the marble counters. Outside, the world was buzzing with merger news and Jonathan's revelations and endless speculation about their relationship. But here, in their half-unpacked kitchen, with moving boxes everywhere and their lives literally in transition, everything felt right. Claire's phone buzzed again, her gallery agent, probably calling about her upcoming show. Max's tablet displayed a dozen urgent emails about the merger's final integration phases. Real life, messy and complicated and perfectly imperfect. "We should get to work," she said reluctantly. "In a minute." Max pulled her close. "First, tell me more about this foundation. Idea. I want to hear everything." And so, surrounded by the physical evidence of their merging lives, they began planning their next chapter, Not as Silicon Valley's power couple, but as two people who had found in each other the courage to be real, the strength to be vulnerable, and the freedom to build something truly meaningful together. 1 year later, the Carter Technologies boardroom looked different in the pre-dawn light. Claire stood at the windows, watching the city wake up, remembering the first time she'd entered this room as an ethics consultant. Now, she was here for a different reason entirely. Nervous. Max's voice came from behind her. She turned to find him leaning against the doorframe, looking devastatingly handsome in a charcoal suit that matched her own tailored ensemble. About the announcement, or about everything else? Both. He crossed the room to join her at the window. Though I'd argue that taking the company public is a smaller step than getting married tomorrow, Claire smiled, touching the elegant engagement ring on her finger. He'd proposed 3 months ago, not with a grand gesture or public spectacle, but quietly, in their home studio while she was painting and he was reviewing quarterly reports. It had been perfect, just like them, mixing business and beauty, ambition and love. The press is already gathering downstairs, she noted. Ready to witness the final merger, as they're calling it. If they only knew. Max's smile was mischievous. The real news isn't just the IPO. Claire touched her stomach, still flat, but harboring their secret. They'd found out a week ago, and the timing couldn't have been more perfect. Tomorrow, they would announce it at the wedding. Their closest friends and family learning that the Alexandra Carter Foundation would soon have a new generation to inspire. Have you checked the foundation's latest numbers? She asked, changing the subject before emotion overwhelmed her. 500 students enrolled in the Tech Arts program, 3 new centers opening next quarter. His pride was evident. The board's unanimous vote to dedicate 5% of the IPO proceeds to expanding the program was unexpected, but welcome. Not that unexpected, Claire smiled. You've changed this company's culture, Max. Shown them that profit and purpose can coexist. We've changed it, he corrected. You taught me that real power comes from being authentic, from creating genuine value. The rest of the company learned that too. A knock at the door interrupted them. Rebecca entered, tablet in hand as always, but now with a C-suite title of her own. They're ready for you both, and, she smiled, someone else is here too. They turned to find Maria Chen in the doorway, looking as sharp as ever. Hope you don't mind me covering this full circle moment, she said. After all, I helped tell the beginning of your story. Seems right to be here for this chapter too. Claire felt Max's hand find hers, their fingers intertwining naturally. Any other surprises we should know about? Just one. Rebecca's smile widened. The advance copies of your book arrived. She handed Claire a hardcover volume. The title read, The Ethics of Love, How One Woman's Stand for Integrity Changed Silicon Valley. The cover photo showed Claire in her studio, surrounded by paintings, with the city skyline behind her. Your story is inspiring people, Maria noted, especially young women in tech. They're learning that they don't have to choose between success and authenticity. Speaking of inspiration, Max nodded toward the boardroom table, where a familiar face smiled from a framed photo. Alexandra's image was part of the foundation's logo now, her quote about breathtaking moments serving as its motto. Claire squeezed Max's hand, knowing these moments before major announcements were always bittersweet for him. She'd be proud of all this. She'd be proud of us, he corrected softly. Then more briskly, shall we give them their headlines? The next hour was a blur of cameras and questions. Claire and Max announced the IPO details, the foundation's expansion, and their vision for the future of technology balanced with social responsibility. What they didn't announce What they kept private just for now was the new life growing inside Claire, their own personal merger creating something entirely new. Later, after the press conference, they stood in Max's office, soon to be relocated to the stunning new headquarters under construction across town. 1 year ago, you walked into this office to review a merger, Max mused. Did you ever imagine we'd end up here? Claire looked around the space where their story had begun. I imagined a lot of things. Success, failure, professional achievement. But this, she touched her stomach, then her engagement ring. This is better than anything I could have imagined, even with all the complications. The public scrutiny, the constant speculation, the pressure of merging our worlds. Especially with all that. She turned to face him fully. Because it's real. Every challenge we've faced, every obstacle we've overcome, it's made us stronger, more authentic, more ourselves. Max pulled her close, his hand resting protectively over their secret. Tomorrow, when we stand in front of everyone we love, I'm going to promise to keep choosing this reality with you. The messy, complicated, beautiful truth of us. As opposed to the perfect corporate facade, she teased, as opposed to anything less than what we've built. His expression grew serious. You know, when Alexandra made me promise not to hide behind walls, I thought I understood what she meant, but it wasn't until you that I really got it. Claire touched his face, seeing in his eyes all the versions of him she'd come to know and love, the powerful CEO, the grieving widower, the man learning to be vulnerable, the future father of her child. And it wasn't until you that I understood that ethics isn't just about rules and boundaries. Sometimes it's about having the courage to be genuine, even when it's terrifying. Outside the office windows, the sun had fully risen, painting the city in shades of possibility. Below, the press was still gathered, hungry for more details about Silicon Valley's most compelling couple. The business world was watching, the markets were responding, and tomorrow would bring a whole new set of headlines about their wedding. But here, in the office where it all began, they were just Max and Claire. Two people who had found in each other the courage to be real, the strength to be vulnerable, and the wisdom to know that true power comes not from control, but from the willingness to let love transform you. Ready to go home? Max asked softly. Claire smiled, thinking of their Victorian mansion with its mix of art and technology, of the nursery they would soon need to plan, of the lifetime of moments stretching out before them. Home, she agreed, to our own private merger. They left. The office, hand in hand, stepping into their future together, not as Silicon Valley's power couple, but as two people who had discovered that the greatest merger of all is the one that happens in the heart, where love and truth create something more valuable than any corporate empire. The end. That was a beautiful story, wasn't it? I hope you enjoyed it. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Your collaboration is very important to me.